I spent 43 years building a home where every birthday, every Christmas, and every family memory lived within those walls. Less than 3 hours after my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law stood in my living room, handed me a suitcase, and calmly told me it was time for me to leave. She believed she was throwing a grieving old widower out of her house. What she didn't know was that she had just declared war on the only person who legally owned every inch of the life she thought she had inherited. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. My name is Arthur Bennett, and at 72 years old, I believed I had already experienced every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. Losing my wife Helen to cancer 11 years earlier had nearly destroyed me. But burying my only son, Ethan, felt like watching the last piece of my future disappear beneath the ground. The funeral ended beneath a cold gray sky that matched the silence hanging over everyone who attended. Friends offered handshakes. Neighbors spoke gentle words they hoped would ease the pain. I appreciated every one of them, even though I barely heard what anyone said. My thoughts stayed fixed on the young boy Ethan used to be, running through our backyard with muddy shoes while Helen pretended to scold him before pulling him into a hug. Those memories felt more real than the cemetery I had just left. When I finally returned home, I expected nothing more than a quiet evening where the family could grieve together. Instead, I walked into a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Several framed photographs of Helen had already disappeared from the hallway. Fresh flowers that neighbors had left beside her portrait were gone. Even the living room furniture had been rearranged. It was as though someone had decided that our family's history needed to be erased before the tears had even dried. Claire Reynolds, my daughter-in-law, stood in the center of the room with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, giving instructions to two movers carrying empty storage boxes. She barely acknowledged that I had entered the house. "Those boxes go upstairs," she told one of the movers. "Everything in the guest room can be packed." Only after finishing her instructions did she turn toward me. There was no sympathy left in her expression, no sadness, no sign that she had buried her husband only hours earlier. "Arthur," she said evenly, "we need to talk." I placed my coat over the chair Helen used to sit in every evening and nodded. "All right." She walked into the dining room, opened a leather folder, and slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. "I've been thinking about what's best for everyone." I unfolded the paper. It was a brochure for an upscale retirement community nearly 60 miles away. The front cover showed smiling seniors playing cards beneath bright sunshine. "I've already spoken with them," Claire continued. "They have a room available next week." I raised my eyes from the brochure. "Why are you showing me this?" She folded her arms. "Because you shouldn't stay here anymore." For several seconds, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. "Excuse me? This house is too large for one person your age. You'll have medical staff nearby, prepared meals, transportation, activities, everything you need." I studied her face, searching for some sign that grief had simply caused her to say something she didn't mean. I found nothing. Every word had been carefully prepared before I walked through the front door. "Claire," I said calmly, "I've lived in this house for more than 4 decades. "Exactly," she answered without hesitation. "You've had your time here." A strange stillness settled inside me. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was simply trying to understand how the woman my son loved had become someone I no longer recognized. "And where do you expect me to go until next week?" She pointed toward the suitcase standing beside the staircase. "I packed enough clothes for several days." My eyes followed her hand. The old brown suitcase belonged to Helen. She had taken it on every vacation we ever shared. Claire hadn't even bought a new one. She had packed my belongings into my late wife's suitcase, as though I were a guest checking out of a hotel. "You packed my things?" I asked quietly. "I thought it would make this easier." "Easier." The word echoed through the room with almost unbelievable cruelty. I slowly walked toward the staircase and rested my hand on the worn leather handle. Helen had stitched one corner after it tore during our anniversary trip to Maine nearly 30 years earlier. Even that small repair held more love than anything Claire had shown me since Ethan died. "Did Ethan know you planned this?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Claire lowered her eyes for the briefest moment before answering. "We talked about the future." That wasn't an answer. It was an escape. I nodded once, more to myself than to her. "I see." She seemed surprised that I wasn't arguing. Perhaps she expected shouting. tears, begging. Instead, I picked up the suitcase and carried it toward the front door. Just before stepping outside, I turned back one final time. Claire was already speaking with the movers again, discussing paint colors and furniture placement, as though the man who built the house no longer existed. She believed she had won before the game had even begun. She never asked to see a single deed. She never questioned whose name appeared on the property records. She never wondered why I wasn't fighting to stay. And that was the moment I realized something that changed everything. Claire Reynolds wasn't throwing me out of her house. She was unknowingly trying to evict the only man who had legally owned it from the very beginning. She started erasing my life before I had even finished grieving. I spent that first night in a modest hotel near the highway because I needed distance more than comfort. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet, and the air conditioner rattled every few minutes. But at least no one there was trying to decide what I deserved. I placed Helen's suitcase beside the bed and sat for a long time without unpacking it. Grief has a strange way of changing ordinary objects. That suitcase was no longer luggage. It was proof of how little Claire understood about the life she was trying to remove. Helen had carried it on our first trip to Boston, on our 25th anniversary, and on the final vacation we took before her illness became too serious. Claire had thrown my clothes into it without knowing any of that. To her, it was just an old bag. To me, it held 40 years of marriage. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan, as a boy, racing down the hallway of the house Claire now claimed as her own. I remembered the day he helped me stain the front porch at 13, the summer he broke the basement window with a baseball, and the evening he returned from college and told Helen he wanted to build a life that made us proud. By dawn, sorrow had hardened into something clearer. I was no longer thinking about whether Claire had acted out of grief. I was thinking about intention. She had packed my belongings before the funeral guests were gone. She had already contacted a retirement home. She had movers ready. That was not panic. That was preparation. I drove back to Maple Ridge just after 8. Claire's car was in the driveway, and a contractor's van occupied the curb. Through the front window, I saw two men carrying framed photographs toward the garage. I stepped inside without knocking. The house still legally belonged to me, whether Claire understood that or not. She appeared at the top of the stairs holding a roll of wallpaper samples. "Arthur, what are you doing here?" "I live here." Her mouth tightened. "Not anymore." I ignored the remark and focused on the boxes stacked against the wall. Each one was labeled in black marker: storage, donate, discard. Helen's name appeared on more than one. I opened the nearest box and found our wedding portrait wrapped in an old towel beneath a pile of cookbooks. "Why is this packed?" Claire came down the stairs with visible impatience. "Because the house needs to feel like mine now." The words landed harder than I expected. "Ethan has been gone less than 24 hours. "Exactly," she replied. "I need to move forward." "By erasing his mother?" She exhaled and pressed 2 fingers against her forehead. "Arthur, please don't make this more dramatic than it already is." I held the portrait against my chest. "This isn't drama. This is my family. It was your family." For the first time, the cruelty came without disguise. "Now, it's my responsibility." A contractor entered the room carrying paint swatches. Claire immediately shifted into her polished real estate voice. "The dining room needs lighter colors. The current palette makes the house feel old." The man gave me an uneasy glance before pretending to examine the wall. I walked into the den. My accounting certificates were gone. Ethan's high school trophies had been removed from the shelves. Helen's cedar music box, which had sat beside the fireplace for decades, was missing. "Where is the music box?" I called. Claire answered from the hallway. "Donation pile. I found it in the garage beneath 2 lamps and a box of chipped dishes." When I picked it up, the lid opened slightly, and the familiar melody began to play. Helen used to wind it every Christmas Eve, while Ethan hung ornaments on the tree. I stood there holding it while men discussed replacing the hardwood floor I had installed with my own hands. That was the moment I stopped giving Claire the benefit of doubt. Grief may make people impatient. It may make them careless. It does not make them erase someone else's history with labels and trash bags. I carried the music box back inside. Claire noticed and blocked my path. "You can't keep taking things. These belong to me." Everything in this house became part of Ethan's estate. Did it? The question unsettled her. Of course it did. "Have you seen the inventory?" "I don't need an inventory." Have you seen the deed? Her expression sharpened. We've already discussed this. No. You made declarations. That isn't the same thing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, because the contractor was still nearby. You are in denial. Ethan supported you. He paid the bills. He maintained this house. Without him, you can't afford to stay. I studied her face and realized how completely she believed her own version of events. That made her more dangerous than someone who knew she was lying. What exactly do you think Ethan paid? I asked. Everything. The property taxes? Yes. The insurance? Yes. The utilities? Yes. And you saw the payments? She hesitated. I saw him help you. That wasn't my question. Claire folded her arms. I'm not going to stand here and justify 8 years of marriage to you. Then don't. Just show me one record. She had none. Her confidence slipped for half a second, then returned in a harder form. You have 14 days now. You gave me 30 yesterday. That was before you came back and interfered with the transition. Transition. I repeated the word because it revealed so much. You mean removing me? I mean protecting what Ethan left behind. I almost corrected her. Almost. But something inside me said not yet. Let her keep talking. Let her keep building decisions on assumptions. Every confident mistake would make the truth more powerful when it arrived. Instead of arguing, I walked through the house and gathered the things that mattered most. Helen's music box, our wedding portrait, Ethan's childhood sketchbook, and the old brass key to the basement filing room. Claire followed me from one room to another. You can't just take whatever you want. I'm taking what belongs to me. You sound confused. No, I said, slipping the key into my pocket. For the first time since the funeral, I'm thinking very clearly. She stopped in the hallway. Where are you going? To find out exactly how much you don't know. I left before she could respond. In the driveway, the contractor's van reflected the house in its side panel. From a distance, nothing had changed. Same brick exterior, same porch, same maple tree Helen planted when Ethan was born. But inside, Claire was dismantling our history room by room. She thought the house was simply valuable property. She had no idea it was also a paper trail. And beneath the floor where she planned to install imported tile sat 4 locked filing cabinets containing 37 years of deeds, tax records, insurance statements, trust documents, and financial records, every page capable of proving that the kingdom she believed she had inherited had never belonged to her husband at all. The basement held more than old papers. It held the truth she never bothered to look, for I drove away without any destination in mind until my hand brushed against the small brass key resting in my pocket. I hadn't touched that key in nearly 6 years. Helen used to joke that I guarded the basement filing room more carefully than most people guarded their jewelry. She wasn't entirely wrong. While other families stored holiday decorations and forgotten furniture downstairs, I stored something far more valuable. Every important document our family had accumulated over 4 decades. When Ethan was a little boy, he once asked why I never threw old papers away. I remember smiling and telling him, because memories fade, son, but paper remembers everything. At the time, he laughed because he thought I was talking like an accountant again. Now, standing in the driveway of the house I had built with my own hands, I finally understood how true those words really were. Claire had spent less than 24 hours trying to erase my family's history from the walls. She never imagined the real history had been waiting beneath her feet all along. I walked through the front door without saying a word. Claire was in the kitchen speaking with someone on the phone. Yes, she said confidently. Once the old furniture is gone, the entire place will feel completely different. She noticed me but continued talking, deliberately pretending I wasn't there. I didn't stop. I crossed the hallway, opened the narrow door beside the laundry room, and began walking down the wooden staircase leading into the basement. Arthur, she called behind me. Where are you going? I answered without turning around. Somewhere you never thought to look. The basement smelled exactly as it always, had a mixture of cedar wood, old books, machine oil, and memories. Every shelf stood exactly where Helen and I had placed it decades earlier. My workbench remained covered with tools from projects Ethan and I had finished together over the years. On one wall hung the height chart where Helen measured Ethan every birthday until he left for college. Claire had been busy removing photographs upstairs, yet she had never stepped into this room. She probably assumed it contained nothing more than junk. That assumption would become the biggest mistake she had ever made. At the far end of the basement stood 4 gray steel filing cabinets bolted directly into the concrete floor. They weren't decorative. They weren't modern. They were simply built to last. I slipped the brass key into the first cabinet and heard the familiar click. The top drawer slid open as smoothly as the day I installed it. Inside sat dozens of perfectly labeled folders arranged by year. Property taxes, insurance policies, utility records, building permits, mortgage documents. Every page rested exactly where I had placed it. Helen used to tease me that I could probably find a receipt from 20 years ago in less than a minute. She wasn't exaggerating. I pulled out the oldest folder, marked 1981. Inside rested the original land purchase agreement. My signature appeared beside Helen's on the final page. We had emptied our savings account to buy that empty lot. I still remembered standing in ankle-deep mud while the realtor apologized because there wasn't even a paved road leading to the property yet. Everyone told us we were making a mistake. Helen simply squeezed my hand and whispered, "One day, this will be home." She had been right. The next folder contained blueprints drawn by an architect who retired nearly 25 years ago. Another held inspection reports. Another contained receipts for every major renovation we had ever completed. I smiled despite everything that had happened. Every nail, every brick, every window, every improvement had a paper trail. Claire believed ownership came from living inside the house. She had no idea ownership came from signatures made decades before she ever met Ethan. I continued searching until I reached a drawer labeled Estate Planning. My heartbeat slowed. I hadn't opened it since Helen's funeral. Several thick binders rested neatly inside. Living will, medical directives, insurance, investments. Then my eyes settled on a dark blue folder with gold lettering across the front. Bennett Family Trust. I carefully lifted it from the drawer and placed it on the workbench. Dust drifted into the air as I opened the cover. The first page carried the date Helen and I signed the trust nearly 12 years earlier, only weeks after her cancer diagnosis. I remembered how determined she had been that afternoon. "Promise me something," she had said while holding my hand in the attorney's office. "Don't ever let grief make you careless. Protect what we built together." At the time, I thought she was worried about paperwork. Now I realized she had been protecting something much bigger. I turned the pages slowly. Every asset appeared exactly as I remembered. The house, the investment accounts, Helen's life insurance, retirement funds, even the lake property where we spent every 4th of July. Every document pointed toward the same legal owner, Arthur Bennett, trustee. Ethan's name appeared several pages later, not as the owner, but as a future beneficiary under specific conditions. I read the paragraph twice, just to make sure my tired eyes hadn't misunderstood it. They hadn't. Ethan had never legally owned the house. He never possessed the authority to transfer it, sell it, or leave it to anyone else, because Helen and I had intentionally protected it years before. Claire had spent 2 days acting like the rightful owner of property that had never belonged to her husband in the first place. A quiet laugh escaped before I could stop it, not because any of this amused me, but because the truth was almost unbelievable. She had threatened to remove me from my own home without ever asking the simplest question every real estate professional should ask first. Who actually owns the property? Footsteps echoed across the basement floor. Claire appeared at the bottom of the stairs with impatience written across her face. "Arthur, what are you doing down here?" I closed the trust folder before answering, remembering. She crossed her arms. "You're wasting your time." "Am I? Whatever papers you're looking at won't change reality." I met her eyes for several long seconds. "You're absolutely right." She seemed relieved by my answer. "Good. Then maybe you'll finally accept what's happening." I gently placed the folder back into the cabinet and locked it again. "Reality," I said as I slipped the brass key into my pocket, "has a funny habit of surprising people who make decisions before reading the facts." Claire frowned. "What does that mean?" I walked past her toward the staircase. "Nothing," I replied calmly. "At least not today." She watched me leave without realizing that the basement no longer held old family records in my mind. It now held every piece of evidence I would ever need. And hidden inside one final folder, one I hadn't even opened yet, was a document that would soon destroy everything Claire believed she had inherited. The house had never belonged to my son, and that was only the beginning. I waited until evening before unlocking the filing cabinet again. Experience had taught me that important decisions should never be made, while emotions were still louder than reason. Helen believed that with all her heart. Whenever a problem seemed impossible, she would make us coffee, sit at the kitchen table and say, "Facts first, feelings later." I could almost hear her voice as I opened the dark blue trust binder one more time. This time I wasn't searching for comfort. I was searching for certainty. I carried the binder upstairs to my old study, closed the door, and spread every document across the desk where I had prepared tax returns for nearly 40 years. Most people saw piles of legal paperwork. I saw the story of our entire life together. Every signature represented another promise Helen and I had made to protect our family, even after we were gone. I started with the trust agreement itself. Line by line, every paragraph confirmed what I had begun to suspect in the basement. The Bennett Family Trust had been created 11 years earlier, shortly after Helen received her diagnosis. We weren't wealthy enough to attract headlines, but we had spent decades building something secure through discipline instead of luck. Helen insisted that everything we owned should remain protected from unnecessary risk, family disputes, and poor financial decisions. At the time, I thought she was simply preparing for the future. Now I realized she had been protecting me from a future neither of us could have imagined. My eyes stopped on the section listing the trust assets. The first line read, "Primary residence, 1147 Maple Ridge Lane. Owner, Bennett Family Trust. Trustee, Arthur Bennett." I read it again, then a third time. There was no ambiguity. The house had never transferred to Ethan. It had never become part of his estate. Legally, it remained exactly where Helen intended it to remain. My fingers rested on the page as another realization quietly settled into place. Claire hadn't inherited the house because Ethan had never possessed the authority to leave it to anyone not during his lifetime, and certainly not after his death. I turned to the next section. Investment accounts, retirement funds, certificates of deposit, rental income from the small commercial property across town. Every major asset flowed through the trust. Together they represented decades of careful planning, not sudden wealth. We skipped expensive vacations. We drove sensible cars. Helen clipped coupons long after we could afford not to. Every sacrifice had become another layer of security for the family we loved. Then I reached the insurance file. I hesitated before opening it, because Helen's name appeared across the top. Inside rested 2 policies. The first had paid for her medical expenses years earlier. The second belonged to Ethan. My heart tightened as I unfolded the final page. Claire had spoken several times about her insurance money since the funeral. She had already mentioned renovating the kitchen and replacing the roof. She talked as though a large check was already on its way. The beneficiary designation told a completely different story. Primary beneficiary, Bennett Family Trust. Trustee, Arthur Bennett. Claire's name didn't appear anywhere on the document, not once. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the room. She wasn't just mistaken about the house. She was mistaken about almost everything. Every plan she had begun putting into motion depended on assumptions instead of facts. She believed Ethan owned the property. He didn't. She believed the insurance belonged to her. It didn't. She believed she could force me into a retirement home because I had nowhere else to go. In reality, she was living inside a house controlled by the very man she was trying to remove. A slow breath escaped as I stared through the study window toward the backyard. Ethan learned to ride his bicycle out there. Helen planted roses along the fence every spring. None of those memories carried a price tag, yet Claire had treated them as obstacles standing in the way of a renovation project. My anger returned for a brief moment, but it disappeared almost as quickly. Anger would only make me careless. Evidence would make me patient. I opened one final folder, labeled Trust Administration Instructions. Helen had insisted we include a personal letter alongside the legal documents. I hadn't read it since the day we signed everything. The envelope still carried her handwriting. For Arthur only if life becomes more difficult than either of us expected. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the letter. Arthur, it began. If you're reading this, then something has happened that neither of us could control. I know your first instinct will always be to protect everyone else, even when they don't deserve it. Promise me one thing. Don't confuse kindness with surrender. We spent our entire marriage building a safe future, not so people could take advantage of your generous heart, but so you would never have to live in fear. If someone ever mistakes your compassion for weakness, let the truth speak for you. You never have to raise your voice when the facts are already on your side. I lowered the letter and closed my eyes. Helen had been gone for 11 years, yet somehow she was still giving me exactly the advice I needed. She wasn't telling me to seek revenge. She wasn't asking me to humiliate Claire. She was reminding me that truth has its own quiet strength. I carefully returned the letter to its envelope before organizing every important document into a single leather portfolio. House deed, trust agreement, insurance policies, property tax records, original purchase contract. Every page was now in chronological order, creating a story that no argument could rewrite. By the time I finished, the sun had disappeared beyond the trees. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed a familiar name, Rebecca Hayes. She had been the estate attorney who helped Helen and me establish the trust all those years ago. We exchanged greetings before she spoke. "Arthur, I was surprised to hear from you after all this time. Is everything all right?" I glanced at the portfolio resting on my desk. "Not exactly. Tell me what happened." 20 minutes later, after listening without interrupting, Rebecca remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she said, "Arthur, before you do anything else, bring every document to my office tomorrow morning." "You think Claire is wrong?" Rebecca gave a short, almost sympathetic laugh. "No." Her voice became firmer. "I think Claire has absolutely no idea how serious her mistake really is." I ended the call and carried the portfolio back downstairs. Before locking it away, I placed Helen's letter on top one last time. Then, I switched off the basement light. Upstairs, Claire was probably making more plans for a house she believed she already controlled. She had no reason to doubt herself. After all, no one had challenged her yet. But tomorrow morning, for the first time since Ethan's funeral, every assumption she had built her future upon would begin colliding with something far more powerful than confidence. The truth, preserved on paper long before she ever became part of our family. She thought humiliating me was the end. It was actually the beginning. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, with a calmness I hadn't felt since Ethan's funeral. Grief was still there, but it no longer controlled every decision I made. Helen used to tell me that the most dangerous mistakes happen when emotions move faster than facts. Claire had been running entirely on emotion. I intended to let the facts catch up with her. Instead of driving straight to Rebecca Hayes' office, I stopped at the neighborhood cafe Helen, and I had visited every Saturday for nearly 20 years. The waitress recognized me immediately. "The usual?" she asked softly. "Please." A few minutes later, she placed a black coffee and a cinnamon roll on the table, before gently squeezing my shoulder. "Helen always said you skipped breakfast unless she forced you." I couldn't help smiling. She usually won. After she walked away, I noticed two familiar voices behind me. Claire had entered the cafe with another woman, wearing a navy business suit. They hadn't seen me yet. "This is the house I told you about," Claire said confidently as she opened photos on her phone. "It's going to be stunning after I renovate it." Her friend studied the pictures. "The neighborhood alone makes it worth a fortune." Claire laughed. "Exactly. Once the paperwork is finished, I'll update the kitchen, knock out 2 walls, and probably sell within a year." "The market is perfect. What about your father-in-law?" "He'll be in assisted living before any of that happens." The words came so naturally that it was obvious she had repeated them before. Her friend lowered her voice. "Does he know?" Claire shrugged. "He's old. He'll adjust." I slowly stirred my coffee without turning around. Months earlier, hearing those words would have broken me. This morning, they simply confirmed something important. Claire wasn't acting out of grief anymore. She had already begun treating my home like an investment, instead of the place where 3 generations of my family had built their lives. I finished breakfast, paid my bill, and left before either of them noticed me. I didn't want an argument. I wanted information. By mid-morning, I arrived at Rebecca Hayes' office, carrying the leather portfolio. Rebecca greeted me warmly, but the smile faded the moment she saw how carefully I had organized every document. "You brought everything." I thought it would save time. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing every page together. She read in complete silence, occasionally making notes before opening another folder. Unlike Claire, Rebecca never made assumptions. She verified every detail before speaking. Finally, she closed the last binder and folded her hands across the conference table. "Arthur, I can say this without any hesitation." I waited, Claire has absolutely no legal ownership of that house. I nodded. That's what I believed. It's more than that. Rebecca slid the trust agreement toward me. She doesn't control the trust. She isn't a beneficiary. She has no authority over the insurance proceeds, and she has no legal right to remove you from your own residence. Even though I already expected the answer, hearing it from the attorney who created the trust with Helen made the truth feel unshakable. Rebecca continued, "The only reason Claire believes she's in control is because no one has challenged her. Should I confront her?" She shook her head immediately. "Not yet." "Why?" Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "People reveal far more about themselves when they think they've already won." That sentence reminded me so much of Helen that it almost made me laugh. Rebecca opened a yellow legal pad and wrote 3 words across the top. "Do nothing yet." "You're probably expecting me to file papers today," she said. "Honestly, yes. That would solve the legal problem." She tapped her pen against the paper. "But it wouldn't solve the human one." I frowned slightly. Rebecca continued, "If Claire truly believes she's the owner, she'll continue making decisions that expose exactly what she intends to do with the property. Every conversation, every contractor, every financial commitment, every false claim becomes evidence." I understood immediately. She wasn't asking me to be passive. She was asking me to be patient. Before leaving, Rebecca handed me her business card with a handwritten note on the back. "Call me the moment Claire claims ownership in front of witnesses." "Why?" "Because that's when the truth carries the greatest weight." On the drive home, I took the long route through Maple Ridge. Every street reminded me of another chapter in my family's life. Ethan learned to drive on Oak Street. Helen organized neighborhood picnics in Willow Park. We celebrated promotions, birthdays, graduations, and anniversaries, surrounded by people who watched our family grow together. Claire saw only rising property values. Helen had always seen a community. When I pulled into the driveway, 3 unfamiliar luxury cars were parked outside my house. Laughter drifted through the open front windows. Curious, I walked toward the backyard gate. Claire had invited 6 people over for wine and appetizers. 2 were local real estate agents. Another introduced himself as an interior designer. The others appeared to be friends from her office. They wandered through my backyard discussing landscaping, renovation costs, and resale potential as though they were touring a property already listed for sale. One woman admired the stone patio Ethan and I built together nearly 15 years earlier. "This would be perfect for entertaining," Claire smiled proudly. "I am thinking about expanding it next spring." Another guest pointed toward Helen's rose garden. "What about those flower beds?" Claire laughed dismissively. "Those are coming out first. They're old-fashioned." I felt something tighten inside my chest. Helen had planted those roses the week Ethan graduated from high school. Every spring she spent hours tending them because each color reminded her of a different season in our lives. To Claire, they were simply outdated landscaping. One of the real estate agents turned toward her. "You really inherited an incredible property." Claire lifted her wine glass with unmistakable confidence. "I know. Ethan always promised we'd eventually make it our dream home." Then she added the sentence that changed everything. "Now that everything belongs to me, I can finally do whatever I want with it." I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and quietly pressed the record button. Every word after that became more valuable than any argument I could have started. A few minutes later, one of the guests noticed me standing near the garden gate. "Claire," he called. "I think someone's here." She turned, saw me, and sighed with visible annoyance. "Arthur, this is a private gathering." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "Yes." She crossed the yard until only a few feet separated us. "I really think it's time you accepted reality." I held her gaze without raising my voice. "May I ask you one simple question?" She folded her arms confidently. "Fine. Before telling everyone this house belongs to you." I spoke slowly enough for every guest to hear. "Did you ever read the property deed?" The smile disappeared from her face. No answer came. The backyard fell completely silent. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, gave her a polite nod, and walked toward my car. Behind me, I heard someone quietly ask Claire, "You have seen the deed, haven't you?" I closed the car door without looking back. I didn't need to. For the first time since Ethan's funeral, doubt had entered the only place Claire believed was completely safe, her own mind. And tomorrow, with Rebecca Hayes standing beside me, Doubt would become something she could no longer ignore. The day I stopped defending myself and started letting the truth speak, I arrived at Rebecca Hayes' office 15 minutes early the following morning. For most of my life, I believed being prepared meant arriving before everyone else. Helen used to laugh because I showed up early to everything from school meetings to family dinners. One day, she would tease, "You're going to arrive before the building is even finished." That memory stayed with me as I stepped into Rebecca's conference room carrying the same leather portfolio that now held 43 years of my family's history. Rebecca was already waiting with a fresh legal pad, a laptop, and several neatly organized folders spread across the table. Unlike the day before, her expression carried a quiet determination. She wasn't simply reviewing documents anymore. She was building a strategy. "Good morning, Arthur," she said. "Did anything happen after we spoke?" I placed my phone on the table. "Actually, yes." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Claire invited several real estate agents and friends to the house." "Go on." She told them the property belonged to her. She discussed renovation plans, resale value, and removing Helen's garden. Rebecca remained silent until I added one more sentence. I recorded the entire conversation. For the first time since we met again, a faint smile crossed her face. "May I hear it?" I nodded and pressed play. Claire's confident voice filled the room. "Now that everything belongs to me, I can finally do whatever I want with it." Then came my question. "Did you ever read the property deed?" The recording ended with complete silence. Rebecca reached for her pen but never wrote a word. Instead, she leaned back in her chair. "Arthur," she said thoughtfully, "do you realize what happened yesterday?" Claire embarrassed herself. "Much more than that." She folded her hands. She publicly represented herself as the legal owner of property she doesn't own in front of licensed real estate professionals. I hadn't considered that. Rebecca continued. She wasn't just speaking casually among friends. She made statements that could influence business decisions involving property she has no authority over. She opened another folder and removed several printed documents. Fortunately for us, we don't need to accuse Claire of anything. I frowned slightly. Why not? Because she'll prove everything herself. Rebecca slid a yellow notepad across the table. At the top, she had written 3 words in bold letters. Let her talk. People who believe they're untouchable almost always become their own worst witnesses. I couldn't help thinking how similar that sounded to Helen. Different words, same wisdom. Rebecca spent the next hour explaining exactly how we would proceed. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no police officers, no lawsuits filed without warning. Everything would happen in the open, supported by documents that had existed long before Claire became part of our family. Truth doesn't need theatrics, Rebecca said. It only needs patience. Before leaving, she handed me a sealed envelope. Don't open this until tomorrow morning. I examined the envelope. What's inside? A formal notice requesting a meeting. With Claire? Rebecca nodded. And anyone else she believes should hear her side of the story. I understood immediately. This wasn't going to happen inside my living room. Rebecca wanted witnesses, neutral witnesses, people who had already heard Claire claim ownership with complete confidence. Where will the meeting take place? I asked. Rebecca smiled faintly. At the office where Claire works? I looked at her in surprise. Her real estate agency? Exactly. She let the idea settle for a moment before continuing. Think about it. Yesterday, she proudly introduced herself as the owner of your home in front of colleagues and industry professionals. Tomorrow, those same people deserve to hear the actual facts. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. There was a significant difference between humiliating someone and allowing the consequences of their own choices to become visible. On my way home, I stopped by the cemetery. It had been nearly a week since Ethan's funeral, yet fresh flowers still covered his grave. I stood there for several minutes without speaking. Losing a child changes the way silence feels. There are no words large enough to explain that kind of grief, so eventually you stop trying. I wish you were here, I whispered. Not because you could fix this, but because I still don't know when your life became so complicated. A gentle breeze moved through the trees above me. My eyes drifted toward Helen's grave a short distance away. For the first time in days, I found myself smiling instead of crying. Not because life had become easier, but because I finally felt as though I was honoring the promises we made to each other all those years ago. Protect the family, protect the truth, Protect what we built together. As I turned to leave, my phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail before answering. Hello, Claire. Her tone was surprisingly calm. Arthur. Sigh. I wanted to apologize about yesterday. That caught me off guard. Really? Maybe we both said things we shouldn't have. I listened without interrupting. I'd like us to move forward peacefully, she continued. After all, we're still family. The conversation felt rehearsed. Every sentence arrived too smoothly, as though someone had helped her prepare it. Then she asked the question that explained everything. By the way, have you found any paperwork about the house? I smiled to myself. There it was. Not concern, not regret, curiosity. Why do you ask? Just trying to organize everything. Everything? Insurance, property records, bills, normal paperwork. She was fishing. Somehow yesterday's conversation had planted enough doubt to make her start searching for answers. But she still didn't know where to look. No, I replied honestly. I haven't organized anything yet. She sounded relieved. Well, don't worry about it. I'll handle everything soon. I'm sure you will, I answered before ending the call. I stood beside my car for several seconds, staring at the dark screen of my phone. Claire had finally become nervous. That single question told me more than anything else she could have admitted. Confidence makes people speak loudly. Fear makes them ask careful questions. When I arrived home that evening, the house seemed unusually quiet. Through the front window, I saw Claire moving quickly from room to room, carrying folders and opening drawers. Cabinets stood half empty. Boxes covered the dining room floor. She wasn't decorating anymore. She was searching. She still believed the documents existed somewhere inside the house. She had no idea the only papers that mattered were already sitting inside Rebecca Hayes' office, neatly organized, legally verified, and waiting for one final meeting that would change every assumption she had built her future upon. Before going to bed, I placed Rebecca's sealed envelope on the nightstand beside Helen's photograph. Tomorrow morning, I would finally open it. And by tomorrow afternoon, Claire Reynolds would discover that confidence built on ignorance never survives its first encounter with the truth. The truth walked into the room wearing my name. I opened Rebecca's envelope at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning. Inside was a single, formal letter, requesting Claire Reynolds attend a legal ownership review regarding the Bennett family trust. Rebecca had intentionally kept the wording simple. Simple. There were no threats, no accusations, and no dramatic legal language. Anyone reading it would assume it was nothing more than a routine meeting. That was exactly what she wanted. Claire couldn't prepare for a battle if she didn't realize one had already begun. I arrived at Harrison Realty 20 minutes before the meeting. Ethan had once considered buying his first home through that very office before deciding to stay in our family house after marrying Claire. Walking through those glass doors brought back memories I wasn't expecting, but today wasn't about the past. It was about ending a lie before it became permanent. Rebecca was already waiting in the conference room, with 3 neatly arranged binders resting on the polished oak table. Each binder carried a different label: property ownership, Bennett Family Trust, estate administration. She greeted me with a calm nod. Everything is ready. Do you think she'll come? Rebecca glanced toward the glass wall overlooking the reception area. People who believe they're right rarely miss an opportunity to prove it. A few minutes later, Claire stepped through the entrance, wearing a navy business suit that projected confidence, followed by her managing broker, 2 senior agents, and the same interior designer who had admired my backyard only the day before. She had even invited them herself, convinced they would watch her settle one final disagreement with her elderly father-in-law. The moment she saw Rebecca, she slowed slightly. "Who's this?" "Rebecca Hayes," the attorney answered, standing to shake her hand. "I helped create the Bennett Family Trust." Claire accepted the handshake politely, but didn't hide her impatience. "I'm not sure why an attorney is necessary. This is really just a family misunderstanding." Rebecca smiled faintly. "We'll know in a few minutes." Everyone took a seat. Claire chose the chair closest to the head of the table, unconsciously placing herself in the position of authority. I noticed the detail, but said nothing. Rebecca opened the first binder without rushing. "Mrs. Reynolds, before we begin, I'd like to ask a very simple question." Claire folded her hands. "Go ahead." Are you currently claiming ownership of the residence located at 1147 Maple Ridge Lane? Yes. Her answer came immediately. On what basis? Claire seemed almost amused. I inherited my late husband's estate. Rebecca nodded once. Do you possess the recorded deed? Claire hesitated for the first time. Not personally. Have you ever read it? There hasn't been a reason. Rebecca slid a certified copy across the table. Today seems like a good opportunity. Claire glanced down without much concern. She expected another routine property record. Instead, her expression gradually changed as her eyes moved across the first page. She reached the ownership section, stopped reading, and looked back at Rebecca. This can't be right. Rebecca remained composed. Would you like to read the owner's name aloud? Claire swallowed before answering. Bennett. Family. Trust. Her voice had lost the certainty it carried only moments earlier. Rebecca continued gently. And who is listed as trustee? Claire's eyes returned to the document. Several long seconds passed. Finally, almost reluctantly, she whispered, Arthur Bennett. The conference room became noticeably quieter. One of the senior agents leaned forward to examine the copy resting beside Claire. Another quietly exchanged a glance with the managing broker. Rebecca didn't pause. She opened the second binder. Perhaps you believed ownership transferred to your husband. Claire immediately nodded. Exactly. Rebecca removed another certified document. Please read paragraph 4. Claire's breathing became uneven. Beneficiary. She stopped halfway through the sentence. Rebecca waited patiently. Please continue. Claire forced herself to finish reading. The beneficiary has no authority to sell, transfer, mortgage, or assign trust property unless authorized by the acting trustee. Rebecca folded her hands. Who was the acting trustee? Claire didn't answer. Mrs. Reynolds? Arthur? Her voice had become barely audible. One of the agents frowned. Wait. He looked directly at Claire. Yesterday you told us the house belonged to you. No one answered him. Rebecca quietly opened the third binder. Let's continue. She placed Ethan's life insurance policy in front of Claire. Yesterday you also mentioned renovation plans using insurance proceeds. Claire stared at the document without touching it. Rebecca slid the beneficiary page closer. Please read this section. Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. The managing broker gently picked up the policy instead. His eyes widened almost immediately. Primary beneficiary. He looked toward me before finishing the sentence. The Bennett Family Trust. Rebecca nodded. Correct. The room fell completely silent. Every assumption Claire had built over the previous week collapsed one document at a time. There was no dramatic speech. No raised voices. No celebration. Just facts, patiently replacing fiction. Claire finally looked at me. For the first time since Ethan's funeral, confidence had disappeared from her face. Arthur, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I met her eyes calmly. I tried to ask one simple question. She frowned through gathering tears. What question? Whether you'd ever read the deed. No one spoke. Rebecca reached into her folder one final time and placed a small digital recorder on the table. Before we conclude, I'd like everyone here to hear something. She pressed play. Claire's own voice filled the room. Now that everything belongs to me, I can finally do whatever I want with it. The recording continued. Guests complimented the property. Claire discussed renovations, resale plans, and removing Helen's rose garden. Every sentence echoed through the conference room, with far more weight than it had carried in my backyard. Rebecca switched off the recorder. Mrs. Reynolds, yesterday you publicly represented yourself as the owner of property that legally belongs to the Bennett Family Trust. Claire lowered her head. The managing broker slowly removed his company identification badge and placed it on the table in front of him. Claire, he said quietly, why didn't you verify ownership before making those statements? She searched desperately for an answer but found none. Excuses sound convincing only until facts arrive. Rebecca closed every binder before speaking one final time. Today's meeting was never about embarrassing anyone. She looked around the room. It was about ensuring that the truth appeared before more damage was done. I stood, gathered my coat, and prepared to leave. Claire suddenly rose from her chair. Arthur, please. Her voice broke. Can we talk? I stopped beside the door but didn't turn around immediately. We will, I answered calmly. But first, I glanced briefly toward Rebecca. She already held another sealed envelope in her hand. There's still one document you haven't seen. Claire stared at the envelope as the color slowly drained from her face. She didn't know what it contained. Neither did anyone else in the room. But Rebecca's next words made every heartbeat seem louder than the last. Mrs. Reynolds, this document doesn't decide who owns the house. She gently placed the envelope in front of Claire. It decides how long you're legally allowed to remain inside it. She gave me 30 days to leave. So I gave her the same. Claire kept staring at the sealed envelope as if refusing to touch it might somehow change what was inside. No one in the conference room moved. The managing broker had stopped pretending this was merely a family misunderstanding. And the two senior agents who had followed Claire into the meeting now seemed far more interested in the table than in her. Rebecca placed the envelope within reach, then stepped back. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. This part belonged to me. Claire finally broke the seal with unsteady fingers and unfolded the document. Her eyes moved across the first few lines, then stopped. She read them again, slower this time. 30 days? The confidence in her voice had vanished. I rested both hands on the back of the empty chair beside me. That should sound familiar. Her attention snapped toward me. Arthur, you can't be serious. You gave me 30 days to leave a home I built before you ever met Ethan. I was grieving. So was I. The answer left no room for another excuse. Claire lowered the notice and glanced around the room, suddenly aware of every witness she had invited. This is cruel. I felt the weight of that word. Not because it hurt, but because of how easily she used it now, that the consequences had reached her. Cruel was packing my clothes before my son's funeral flowers had wilted. Cruel was removing Helen's photographs and calling my memories outdated. Cruel was arranging assisted living as though I were a problem to be transferred. Her mouth opened, but I continued before she could reshape the story. This is not cruelty. This is a deadline. The managing broker shifted in his chair. One of the agents reached for the deed again, checking the name at the top as though facts might somehow become less embarrassing the second time. Claire folded the notice in half, then unfolded it immediately. Where am I supposed to go? You are a licensed real estate professional, I said. I assume you know how to find housing. A flicker of anger returned. Ethan would never have allowed this. That was the first sentence of the morning that nearly broke my control. For 1 second, all I could see was my son at 12 years old, standing beside me in the garage with sawdust in his hair, asking if he had measured a board correctly. Ethan had trusted people too easily. He had always wanted peace, even when peace demanded too much from him. I wasn't going to let Claire use his memory as one final weapon. Do not speak for my son when he is no longer here to answer you. The words came out low and firm. Claire flinched. I continued. If Ethan knew you planned to remove me from my own home before his funeral was over, I think he would have been ashamed. Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time no one rushed to comfort her. Even grief has limits when it is used to avoid responsibility. Rebecca gathered the binders, leaving only the notice and one certified copy of the deed on the table. Claire reached for the document before Rebecca could close her case. There has to be some arrangement. Her voice had changed again, moving from accusation to negotiation. I can pay rent. I studied her for a moment. Only days earlier, she had called me dependent. She had chosen a retirement community based on what she thought my social security could cover. Now she wanted generosity from the man she had treated like an unwanted guest. Market rate, I said. She blinked. What? You may remain beyond 30 days if you pay market rent, first and last month in advance, plus a security deposit. Her managing broker finally spoke. For that neighborhood, you're probably talking at least $3,500 a month. Claire's face tightened. That's ridiculous. No, I replied. That's the market you were so eager to profit from. One of the senior agents lowered her head to hide a reaction, Claire noticed. Humiliation settled over her, not because I had raised my voice, but because the language she used against others had been returned to her without decoration. I don't have that kind of money right now, she said. Then 30 days should be enough time to make another plan. She pressed both palms against the table. You knew all along. Yes. You let me believe the house was mine. I asked whether you had read the deed. You could have stopped me. You could have stopped yourself. The room tightened around that sentence. Claire took a step away from the table, then another, as though distance might help her breathe. Her eyes found the colleagues she had invited for support. None of them came closer. The managing broker removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Claire, we need to discuss the statements you made to clients and staff about this property. She faced him immediately. Not now. It has to be now. His tone remained professional, which somehow made the moment worse. You represented yourself as the legal owner of a home you had never verified. You discussed renovation work, resale plans, and potential listing arrangements. That creates a serious credibility problem. Claire's attention bounced between him, Rebecca, and me. For the first time, she understood that the house wasn't the only thing slipping away. I made a mistake. You made a series of decisions, he answered. There's a difference. I didn't enjoy hearing it. Part of me still remembered the woman Ethan brought home 8 years earlier, nervous and eager to impress Helen. I remembered how she helped set the table that first Thanksgiving and laughed when Ethan burned the rolls. I had not come to destroy that woman. I had come to stop the one she had chosen to become. Claire picked up her purse, but her hand missed the strap on the first attempt. She tried again, this time gripping it so tightly the leather creased beneath her fingers. Arthur, please. I waited. Can we talk somewhere private? We had that chance at the house. I didn't understand. No, you didn't ask. Her shoulders dropped. The anger left her face, replaced by something more difficult to watch. The first honest recognition of how badly she had misjudged me. Still, regret arriving after consequences is not the same as respect arriving before them. I stepped toward the door. Claire followed me into the hallway, while Rebecca remained behind to finish the meeting with the broker. Arthur, she called again. I stopped near the reception desk. Several employees pretended not to listen. What happens now? She asked. I faced her fully. Now you pack your belongings. Her eyes closed briefly. And after that, you decide whether this becomes the worst thing that ever happened to you. I let the words settle before finishing. Or the first time you finally learn who you are without someone else's house, money, or kindness holding you up. I walked out of Harrison Realty without waiting for her answer. Outside, the morning air felt sharper than before. I expected victory to feel satisfying. It didn't. I had proven the truth, protected the house, and stopped Claire from erasing what Helen and I built. But none of it brought Ethan back. That was the part no deed, trust, or legal notice could repair. As I reached my car, Rebecca stepped through the doors behind me. Arthur. I turned. She held her phone in one hand, her expression more serious than it had been all morning. Claire's broker just discovered something. What? Yesterday, before our meeting was scheduled, she signed a preliminary renovation agreement using the house as if she had authority to approve the work. I stared at her. How much? Nearly $60,000. A cold realization moved through me. Claire had not merely planned to change my home. She had already begun spending against it. Rebecca slipped the phone into her bag. The contractor is expecting access tomorrow morning. I glanced back toward the office doors. Claire was still inside, unaware that the worst consequence of her assumptions had not yet reached her. Then, tomorrow morning, I said someone is going to learn that the house was never the only thing she put at risk. By the time she realized what she had done, it was already too late the following morning. I arrived at the house just before 9. For the first time in nearly a week, there were no moving trucks, no decorators, and no laughter drifting through the open windows. Instead, a white contractor's truck sat in the driveway exactly where Rebecca said it would be. 3 workers were unloading cabinets, while another measured the front entrance with a laser level. Claire hurried across the porch the moment she saw me. Dark circles framed her eyes, and the confidence that had once defined every step was gone. Arthur, she called, forcing a smile that disappeared almost immediately. I know yesterday didn't go well, but I've already explained everything to the contractor. We can sort this out after the renovations begin. I glanced toward the crew carrying expensive kitchen fixtures into the garage. Have they signed anything yet? The paperwork is already finished. Paid? She hesitated. The deposit will be transferred this afternoon. Before I could answer, a black sedan stopped beside the contractor's truck. Rebecca stepped out holding a single folder. She greeted the project manager first instead of me. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Hayes. Before any work begins, there's something you should see. The manager accepted the documents politely. Less than a minute later, the color drained from his face. He turned another page, then another, before lifting his eyes toward Claire. Mrs. Reynolds, you're not listed as the owner. Claire stepped forward immediately. That's a misunderstanding. We're dealing with family paperwork. The manager slowly shook his head. Our insurance won't allow us to perform work without authorization from the legal owner. He closed the folder and faced his crew. Stop unloading. Every worker froze. One by one, the cabinets were carried back toward the truck. Claire stared in disbelief. You can't just leave. Actually, the manager replied, we have no choice. He removed the renovation agreement from his clipboard. You sign this as the legal property owner. His finger rested beneath her signature. According to these records, that statement isn't true. Claire reached for the papers. Please, give me 1 day. I'll fix it. I'm sorry. He folded the contract in half. This agreement is now void. Without another word, the workers packed their tools, secured the truck doors, and drove away, leaving tire marks across the driveway. Helen and I had poured with our own hands decades earlier. Claire remained standing in complete silence until her phone rang. She answered without checking the screen. Hello? I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I watched her expression change almost instantly. What do you mean I'm suspended? Another pause. No, there has to be some mistake. Her shoulders sank lower with every sentence she heard. I never intended to misrepresent anything. She closed her eyes. Please don't do this over the phone. The call ended. She lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen as though waiting for it to ring again. My broker, she whispered. The compliance board has opened an internal investigation. No one responded. There was nothing left to argue. Yesterday's confident promises had become today's consequences. Claire sat down on the front steps, resting both elbows on her knees. For several long moments, she simply watched the empty street. Then she spoke without looking at me. I thought losing Ethan was the worst thing that could ever happen. Her voice cracked. Now it feels like I'm losing everything else too. I stood beside Helen's rose garden, where the first blooms of the season had begun to open despite everything that had happened around them. Grief doesn't excuse every choice we make, I said quietly. It only reveals who we become while we're carrying it. Claire finally looked up. There was no anger left in her face, only exhaustion. I was so certain I was protecting my future. No, I answered gently. You were protecting an illusion. Tears slipped down her cheeks. This time, they felt different. Not the tears of someone caught in a lie, but of someone beginning to understand how many small decisions had carried her to this moment. I never hated you, she admitted. She struggled to finish the sentence. I convinced myself you were standing in the way of the life Ethan and I were supposed to have. I nodded slowly. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as his father. She covered her face with both hands. I'm so sorry. The words lingered in the quiet morning air, but neither of us reached for them. Some apologies deserve to be heard. Others need time to become actions. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Rebecca. Everything has been finalized. You can move forward whenever you're ready. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Claire noticed. Is that it? She asked softly. Is everything over? I looked toward the front door of the house. Helen and I had spent 43 years building together. The porch swing Ethan had painted in high school still moved gently in the breeze. No, I said after a long silence. The legal part is over. She swallowed hard. Then what's left? I met her eyes one final time. Tomorrow morning, I'm opening a box that Helen asked me not to touch unless our family completely fell apart. Claire frowned through her tears. What box? Something Ethan never knew existed. Her breathing stopped for a second. What's inside? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, even after everything Claire had lost, she still had no idea that Helen had left behind one final letter, one that would change the way both of us remembered Ethan, forever. In the end, I didn't win my house back. I kept my promise to my wife. The morning Claire moved out, the house was quieter than I could ever remember. There were no angry voices, no arguments echoing through the hallway, and no moving crew rushing from room to room. Only the soft sound of cardboard boxes sliding across hardwood floors and the occasional closing of a cabinet door. I arrived just after sunrise carrying a small box of pastries from the bakery Helen loved every Saturday. Old habits have a strange way of surviving even after the people we shared them with are gone. For a moment, standing on the front porch, I almost expected Helen to open the door with flour on her hands and tell me breakfast would be ready in 5 minutes. Instead, Claire opened it. She looked older than she had only a week earlier. Not because of time, but because regret has a way of aging people faster than birthdays ever can. She stepped aside without saying a word, silently inviting me inside. The living room looked different again. This time, not because someone was trying to erase the past, but because someone was carefully putting it back together. Helen's photographs had returned to the mantel above the fireplace. Our wedding portrait hung in its original place. Ethan's childhood baseball glove rested on the bookshelf, where it had remained for nearly 20 years before being packed away. Even Helen's little cedar music box sat beside the window exactly where she always kept it. Claire noticed me looking around the room. "I found everything I packed," she said quietly. "Some of it took hours." I walked over to the music box and gently opened the lid. The familiar melody floated through the house once more. I closed my eyes, allowing myself one brief moment to remember the woman who had filled these rooms with laughter long before grief ever entered them. When the music stopped, Claire placed a small cardboard box on the dining table. "These were in my car," she said. Inside were Helen's gardening gloves, her handwritten recipe notebook, an old anniversary card I had given her years ago, and a framed family photograph Claire must have forgotten to unpack. She looked at the box for several seconds before speaking again. I kept telling myself they were just things. Her voice trembled. "I understand now they weren't." I nodded slowly. "No, they never were." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence we had shared so many times before. It was the kind that appears when there are no more lies left to defend. Claire finally took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything that happened." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "For days I kept telling myself I made one mistake." She lowered her eyes. "The truth is, I made dozens of them." I didn't interrupt. This wasn't my confession to make. The first mistake was believing a house could replace Ethan. The second was believing money would make me feel safe. After that, every decision became easier to justify. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. By the time I realized what I had become, I barely recognized myself. I rested my hand on the back of the dining chair where Helen always sat during family dinners. "Grief changes people," I said softly. "But it doesn't choose who we become." "We do." Claire nodded once. "I know." She reached into her purse and removed a single house key, placing it carefully on the table between us. "This belongs to you." I looked at the key without touching it. It always did. A faint, bittersweet smile crossed her face. "I suppose that's the lesson I should have learned before trying to take it." We both laughed quietly, not because anything was funny, but because sometimes acceptance arrives with a gentleness that anger never could. Claire picked up the last suitcase near the front door before stopping one final time. "Arthur," she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I met her eyes. Forgiveness isn't pretending something never happened. She waited. "It's deciding not to let it decide the rest of your life." She swallowed hard. "Does that mean you forgive me?" I thought about Helen. I thought about Ethan. I thought about the empty chair that would forever remain empty at every Christmas dinner from now on. Some wounds never truly heal. They simply become part of who we are. "I forgive you," I answered honestly. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It simply means I refuse to carry hatred any longer. Claire's shoulders relaxed for the first time since Ethan's funeral. "Thank you." She picked up her suitcase, walked through the front door, and paused at the end of the walkway. "I hope one day I become someone Ethan would still be proud of." I watched her leave without answering. That was a journey only she could complete. After her car disappeared around the corner, I closed the front door and stood alone inside the home Helen and I had built more than 4 decades earlier. The house felt peaceful again, not because everything had returned to the way it once was, that would never be possible, but because the truth no longer had to fight for a place inside these walls. I carried the box of pastries into the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat beside the window overlooking Helen's rose garden. The first morning sunlight touched the flowers she had planted with her own hands, and for the first time since losing Ethan, I allowed myself to believe that life could still hold quiet moments worth living. I realized then that the house had never been the real victory. The trust, the deed, the insurance policies, and every legal document had only protected bricks, wood, and land. What they could never protect was the kindness Helen spent a lifetime teaching me, the integrity she expected me to keep, and the promise I made to her on the day we signed those papers together, that no matter what happened after she was gone, I would never allow fear, anger, or bitterness to become the foundation of the home we built together. Claire believed she was fighting for a house. I was fighting for a promise. And in the end, that promise turned out to be worth far more than anything money could ever buy. If this story teaches anything, I hope it's this. People may underestimate your kindness, mistake your silence for weakness, or believe they can rewrite your life simply because they arrived later. But truth has remarkable patience. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It simply waits until the right moment to be seen. And when that moment finally comes, no lie, no matter how confident, can stand in its light.